Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. This session is the body-worn camera and community engagement, and it's featuring our subject matter experts, Mary O'Connor and Steve Rickman, as well as representatives from Pitt County, North Carolina, and West Goshen, Pennsylvania. I will turn it over to our presenters now. Thank you so much for being here.
Okay, I'll get started. Thank you, Rachel. So I think we'll just do some quick introductions of our speakers today, and then we'll get into the content of our community engagement session. So welcome, everybody. My name is Mary O'Connor. As you see on the screen, I'm a retired deputy chief from the City of Tampa Police Department in Tampa, Florida. I am happy to now be a body-worn camera TTA lead, and I've been retired for a few years now. I spent all of my career there, and I am looking forward to sharing any expertise or any insight that I can with you today. We are joined by some guests. We have Steve Rickman. If you guys would just introduce yourselves in order of what's on the slide. Let's just do a quick intro, and then we'll go back to me and we'll get started. So Steve?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Steve Rickman, and I've been working for the last 40 years and trying to improve relationships between law enforcement and community. I first became involved with body-worn cameras in 2009 back in Las Vegas when we first brought up the possibility of implementing cameras there. I've been working with the CNA TA team for the last 5 years. Currently a associate manager for community policing in Chicago and in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
All right, great. Captain?
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Justin DeMedio with the West Goshen Police Department here in Chester County, Pennsylvania. We're about 25 miles outside of the city of Philadelphia. So we just started our body-worn camera program in 2020, and I'm pleased to be here to discuss the program and how we've used it to engage our community partners. Thank you.
Thanks, Captain. Chief?
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm John Gard. I'm Chief Deputy with the Pitt County Sheriff's Office in Greenville, North Carolina. Greenville is located, I guess, halfway between Raleigh and the Outer Banks. So when I started in the business some 29 years ago, we considered it rural back then, but we're much more populous. We're also new to the game with the implementation of body-worn cameras. We went live October of 2020. So happy to be here and hope we can share some great information with y'all this afternoon. Chief.
Great. Thanks, gentlemen. That's why we asked you to join us. We really hope to learn from each other in this great session. So again, we'll go through some of the material. We'll talk about it. We'll have some time for Q&A. Here's some of the meeting logistics that Rachel already mentioned. I think we are ready to begin. So again, please put your questions in the chat, and we will get to them. If not during the session, then we'll get to them at the end, and you can feel free to ask questions of myself, Steve, or our esteemed guests that are here. So let's talk a little bit about community engagement. What is community engagement? So what do we want to do when we engage the community is inform them and our stakeholders about the body-worn camera process, policy, program implementation, etc. Why do we do that? Obviously, it builds trust and support for the programs, and it improves transparency with the communities that we serve. Now, when we mention stakeholders, we typically involve internal stakeholders in our development process, which would be our IT department, our grant management unit, maybe our professional development standards bureau. And then we also involve some stakeholders that are critical to the success of our body-worn camera program, like our court personnel, prosecutors, public defenders, even our city or county councils, local government leaders, maybe even some advocacy groups. But really what's important to note here is local organizations or institutions that the police may frequent, like hospitals or universities or businesses, and our community members, leaders, are probably our most important stakeholders in the entire process. And when I say process, we talk about policy development all the way from the very beginning, implementation of the hardware itself, and then importantly, the ongoing development of the relationships that go on way above and beyond the initial implementation phase. Some of us are even involving the community members and leaders and other stakeholders in the training of our body-worn camera programs. So what we do in order to keep the community members and leaders and our other organizations involved throughout the process is outreach. Now, when we say outreach, a lot of times our minds just go to a particular type of social media outlet or maybe a YouTube channel or our local media outlets that can help us with either printed or media communication about our body-worn cameras. And again, I think, when we talk about outreach, we really have to think a little bit outside the box, because the trust that we're looking to build with our community is an ongoing process. So the outreach efforts don't just stop at one outreach effort. They need to be continuing and ongoing for that trust and that cohesive relationship between our agencies and our community members. The more cohesive we can be, obviously, the better off we're going to be. It creates that buy-in. We want the buy-in not only from our internal stakeholders, but our external ones as well. So there's a couple of different ways of doing that. Obviously, we can reach out to our local media. We can have community meetings where we can attend meetings at those businesses that were addressed earlier, like maybe our faith-based community or our hospitals or other business organizations. We can meet and we can demonstrate, we can explain what the body-worn camera process is all about. Some agencies engage in workshops, presentations, even demonstrate the technology and allow the technology to be shown hands-on capacity with the attendees at the meetings. Some agencies conduct online surveys. The feedback that we get from online surveys can be, very beneficial, obviously, as long as the survey is anonymous or not so anonymous. I think the feedback from the community in a forum where they're free to speak and they're free to express their opinions about the body-worn cameras is important for us. Going back to the community meetings, not everybody is comfortable in a setting where they feel free to raise their hand and maybe speak in a crowded room. That's where the confidentiality of the online surveys can really be beneficial. A lot of agencies use citizens academies to help with these outreach efforts, when the citizens can see the footage that gets recorded and they can actually tell that when the record button is pressed and what that actually captures, it can be very beneficial. And social media, there's a lot of different ways to engage the community in social media. Our guest speakers here today are going to speak a little bit about how they engage the community and, again, create that ongoing trust building, transparency, collaborative, cohesive process. I have a couple of examples I want to share before we turn it over to our guest speakers. I just wanted to touch base and talk about a couple of different examples. Arlington, Texas, their police department recently began posting the body-worn camera of the week episodes on their YouTube channel. So the body-worn camera episodes in Arlington, Texas do not only capture critical incidents, they capture very routine activities that the community may not realize that officers are out doing on a daily basis, answering disturbance calls or answering, medical calls or whatever that may be. And when the community can view these videos of the week, it helps to bolster trust in the community. Cookeville, Tennessee did a really unique outreach effort where they partnered with their Tennessee Technical University School of Education, and they created an entire college course leveraging much of the material that they typically use in their Citizens Academy. So in one of the first classes, the Cookeville Police Department showed the full class a complaint a Cookeville resident made on social media against one of their officers. They then showed the class the officer's body-worn camera footage, which showed a completely different story. Together, the officers in the class walked through the scenario and discussed what can happen when the incidents go viral on social media without showing the whole picture, because as we know, that can typically happen. These classes also really prompted very deeper thought and conversations regarding policing and trust between officers. And many of these students have now changed their perceptions of police officers based on these classes. So it's been very beneficial. In yet another agency, going back to the local media, this agency invited the local media to come into the department, have the body-worn cameras demonstrated for them, and were invited to wear the cameras shoot a little bit of footage, play it back, and see what the perspective covered when in record mode. Okay, so this is what Greensboro, North Carolina did. As you can see here, the department created a frequently asked questions card to make it easier for their officers to share information about the agency's body-worn camera program. The cards are readily available in the roll call room. The officers carry the cards around on their shift, and when a member of the community has a question, they can pass the card out, and the card, as you can see, answers some of the most commonly asked questions by the community. Okay, so these agencies, St. Mary's, Kingsland County, and Camden County, Georgia, actually created a visual of a body-worn camera billboard. So it shows that now the body-worn cameras are up and running in these counties. They explained to the community that they are in place, and they took this video footage, this picture, and they also put it out on their different social media channels like Facebook and Twitter, and this was a collaborative effort by these three counties. So it's a nice visual just to keep the community informed of the presence of the body-worn cameras. Okay, so now we've got Pitt County, North Carolina, and we are joined by Chief Deputy John Gard, as you've heard from, who is going to show you, we're going to show you a clip, and then Chief Deputy is going to speak about it. So they took their social media efforts above and beyond, and they created a video to share with the community. And the video actually included scenario-based, and the scenarios were played out by members of the agency to help the community understand the benefits of the body-worn cameras and what they capture. So let's take about 30 seconds. Let's watch the clip. And then Chief Deputy, if you would take it from there about how this it benefited your agency, we'd appreciate it. Thanks. Okay, Brittany, I think we can pause there since we don't have volume. We kind of get the point. So the officer is trying to make an arrest of a guy that he's known for wanted armed robbery. And you can see as he engages the suspect and chases the suspect, the entire video is caught. Chief Gard?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thank y'all for inviting us here today to kind of share bits and pieces of our journey. We in Pitt County, just to give you a little background so you know how this all come about, this wasn't our first attempt to get body-worn cameras. In fact, we had sought funding previous, but our county commissioners actually declined funding. So Sheriff Nance, who's in our first term, part of her platform when she ran for sheriff was to, implement body-worn cameras. She had received a lot of information out in the field about having this for transparency and all the reasons everybody wants to implement those within their own community. So she made that a priority. When she was elected to office, we actually put together a group of our deputies to try out, we didn't call it the demonstration initiative, where we tried out 5 different vendors. We ended up selecting the Axon camera. And as you all are aware, part of the grant was to, have community involvement. How do you get your implementation out to the community? And we did the things like the news releases where you got a 30-second spot on the 6 o'clock news, and you had good coverage in the newspapers. But we felt we needed to know more. That 30-second spot on the evening news was not going to do justice to all the questions that were going to come up from the community about the body cam, nor was it going to engage, a number of the folks that participated in the video. We really wanted to do that, so our staff had ownership. So we turned to social media. And we developed a 9-minute video that was linked on YouTube. And as of right now, since the sheriff's come into office, this is the second most viewed video we've done on YouTube. Our plans are in the future is on the anniversary to link it back up to Facebook and post it out and just keep immersing. And we all, you know, were across the country were involved in the pandemic over the past more than a year. So there was a lot of debate internally how we were going to reach our citizens when we were restricted by governor's order, like a lot in the country, that, you know, your assemblies could be limited in number. So that's the reason we went with social media. Now, we are fortunate our public information officer has a background in this type of work, working with YouTube to put together various videos, and we've used it right often, not just with the body worn cameras, but even as a recruitment tool for our deputies. And now we're in the process of opening one up to the jail. So it really helped us a lot. In fact, if you look at the footprint, I know our local media here covers about a third of the state. We're a rural part of North Carolina, although Pitt is the 10th most populous county out of the 100 we have. This enabled us to reach not only our citizens, but others. In fact, we had no negative comments as a response to this. And the positives we got, which I thought was really unique, was we had somebody reach out to us, a police officer from Brazil, that was applauding our effort and saying they had just implemented body worn cameras within their department, their law enforcement agency. So I thought that was really significant. But to date, we have received no negative feedback, only positive. And again, as you know, our citizens here, you know, you want to reach everybody you can, even that younger group of citizens, and most of those folks out there, I mean, social media is their go-to for information. So that's why that was selected. And of course, COVID may have edged us that way a little more, but that was our little bit to engage the community here from the social media aspect.
Oh, sorry about that. Thanks, Chief. We appreciate that. And you guys have the link to the entire 9-minute video in your chat. Jessica put it up there for everybody. It's really a great video to watch, and I very highly encourage everyone to take advantage of that. So let's turn it over to Steve Rickman now for his portion of community engagement. Steve?
Thank you, Mary. My part of this presentation is to highlight the issues that most often draw the interest of community stakeholders and members. Currently, many local city councils and state legislatures are responding to growing community pressure concerning policies and protocols for the release of video footage after a critical incident. Now, often after a fatal shooting or in custody death, there is pressure from community stakeholders and members and media sometimes for immediate release of the video. For lots of reasons, mostly cited that the early release of a video could compromise an investigation. They are not released immediately after the incident. This adds to the mistrust of community members and stakeholders, and sometimes leads to speculation from them as to what happened. Rumors get started, and community members start filling in gaps and start imagining the worst at times. Earlier today, you heard a presentation by Laura McElroy, where she demonstrated the benefits of an early release of video after a critical incident. Do it as soon as you can. And she cited Las Vegas, Nevada as a best practice. In Las Vegas, they'll hold an initial briefing, often within 24 hours, where video is released, but it's followed by more explanation in detail, and all this generally occurring within a 72-hour or 3-day period. Other areas of concern that you would certainly raise with community stakeholders and members, they often come up. The notifications of when someone is being videotaped. I know initially when the program got started, and it was fairly new technology. Many departments often had their officers remind citizens that the encounter was being videotaped. Now that they've been around for 4 or 5 years, there's probably less of that, but it's something that residents often bring up. Instances where recordings are not allowed. Often residents like to have some clarification and clarity around those situations. If an officer is in a private home or is in a hospital or in settings, citizens would like to always have a sense of when those recordings will be allowed and when they will not be allowed. Another concern often raised by citizens is the activation and deactivation requirements. And they want to know if those cameras are running all the time. At what point does the officer turn the camera on prior to responding to a situation? What time is it? What's the protocols for deactivation? So these are things that residents are really tuned into and want more information about. Another issue that comes up is accountability for lack of compliance. When officers don't have their cameras on and there's a critical incident and they get caught up in the moment, and for whatever reason the camera isn't activated, that adds to mistrust, and citizens and residents want to know what happens to those officers who don't comply. And then just generally, they want to know, they want to be updated on a regular basis. They want regular community meetings and briefings. They want to know when there's policy changes, and they want to understand those policy changes and have opportunities for input. We're fortunate enough today to have with us Captain Justin DeMedio, who is going to actually give us a specific example of how these communities are engaged and how they share information back and forth with community members. Captain, can you provide us with your examples? Appreciate you.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Rickman. So we began in late 2019 engaging in the process of starting a body-worn camera program. We had mobile video cameras for 12 years prior to that, never had the body-worn cameras. Several agencies around us did engage in the body-worn camera program. So in 2020, we began the process of acquiring grants for the assistance in the purchase of the cameras. So in doing so, not only did we reach out to the common stakeholders that were already mentioned earlier here, such as the courts, hospitals. We have a local hospital in our jurisdiction, and the schools, which were all with certain questions and minor limitations. They were all on board with us. But we also decided to reach out to our local community stakeholders, community partners, which consisted of local pastor of a local Baptist church, pastor of a non-denominational community church in our area, the president of an Islamic mosque, and the president of a local NAACP chapter. We began those conversations right around spring of last year, which with the confluence of events in the country, it's sort of timing was perfect. So we've kept those relationships ongoing. We have quarterly meetings now with them. And as you can imagine, beyond things like use of force and just the national narrative conversation, the body-worn camera program has been a topic of conversation that comes up every meeting. Some of their questions, just as Mr. Rickman has mentioned earlier, a lot of the questions were very similar to what he mentioned. They want to know about retention rates. They want to know about policies as far as activation and deactivation, consistency with the policy, and what were the sanctions to the officers within the policy, and how are we monitoring them. So we spoke about all of it, our policies. We copied our policy. We brought it to the meetings. We talked about, we highlighted those areas of concern, and we got a lot of great feedback from the community partners. And even though our program has been implemented since late of 2020 now, we're up and running for about 8 months now. And every meeting they'll come up, they'll question, just how things are going. How are we monitoring the officers' usage? We've talked about our policies as far as the monthly reviews that the supervisors are required to do on each of their officers. and what the sanctions are for not following the policy. Of course, some of the community members that just only see what they hear on TV or just don't know about the cameras themselves. Of course, one of the questions were, could the officers, what prevented the officer from deleting footage? And obviously the answer is they can't. There's no possible way they can delete footage of a camera. What if they didn't activate it right away? We talked about the record after the fact, the pre-record features on the cameras that we use. So they were very receptive and very very positive feedback to our answers. And again, it was a win-win for both of us, because there was unintended positives that came out of just those dialogues that we've kept up with the community partners.
All right, great. Thank you, Captain. So let's have time for a little bit of Q&A. Anybody have any questions, any comments, any thoughts that they'd like to share? Please put them in the chat. Jessica, do you have any on your end?
Yes, so we did have a few questions come in, one of them being, have you seen a change in concerns from community members related to BWC video and program implementation in the last year?
Captain, would you mind taking that one, since you're having these ongoing dialogues? I mean, has there been any significant or even insignificant, has there been change in the last year? I would imagine there has been.
Yeah, so the general public, like I said, prior meetings, so we were not the first in the area to implement the program. So the advantage to that was that many people in the general community weren't surprised when the officers showed up with the body-worn camera on their chest. It was already well documented. Many agencies around us, like I said, had started the program within a year or even 2 years prior to us. So we were fortunate enough to come in a little later to the game. So it wasn't, it didn't pause the officer's interaction with the community member to say, hey, what is that? Is that recording? What are you doing? You watch the recordings, and you do see the members of the community sort of look down at it and acknowledge it, whether it be verbally or just visually. But no, we've had a lot of positive feedback. We've had no issues with people complaining about it. We certainly, part of the policy and some of part of the training with the officers is, any footage, and Mr. Rickman brought it up about as far as policies, as far as being inside people's homes, unless there is an unreasonable violation of a person's privacy or sense of dignity, the cameras stay on the whole time. And again, the cameras are recording, even though when they're not activated, they're recording video. They're not recording audio until they're activated, but they are recording video. So the officers have to be cognizant of that. So if you are in a situation where there's no law enforcement purpose or gain out of the camera being on, they have to be cognizant of the fact that they're still recording video. So they will, even if they physically turn their body or exit out of the room, they're pretty cognizant of that. So.
Thanks, Captain. Chief, anything from your regard as far as specifically the events of the last year? Any change in concerns from community, increase, decrease? I mean, I know the implementations across the nation as a whole have increased in the last year just by, sheer, numbers of agencies that are all getting on board. Anything from your agency as far as the challenges of the last 12 months?
And no challenges. I can tell you from an administrative perspective, it's certainly been helpful in any complaints we've received from actions of the officers. And it's just unreal how many hours it cuts out of, it just speeds up the process. But from the community, no, it's mostly been praise. Like the captain said, we were not the first law enforcement agency in our area we're actually one of the last, as a matter of fact. So that was, in those regards, that was helpful. Man, I wish we would have implemented a long time ago. Now, the only thing we've really picked up is more conversations internally with officers. And as Mr. Rickman mentioned about release of video in the most recent event that was down in Elizabeth City, back a few months ago. That stimulated a lot of conversation, but most of that conversation is internal, and it just reinforces the need. Like our policies are living documents, and we have committees set up of the users, of the body worn camera users on each level of rank where they're deployed, that meet regularly to discuss how we keep the policy fresh. I mean, there are times, we have things that say these are to be started at this specific time and you can end here, but with us, like others, I mean, we're responsible for sitting at the emergency room with maybe a person in mental crisis for long periods of time where we're maybe outside the door and they're inside. Do we keep those on? So there's a conversation internally, and most we're picking up is actually from staff.
Steve, any thoughts from you about what's changed in the last year, or should we just move on to the next question? It's up to you.
Yes, I mean, I there was a slide up earlier that highlighted changes in time limits for the release of video after a critical incident. Many state legislatures and some city councils around the country are moving in that direction. For instance, in Washington, D.C., they recently enacted a 5-day time limit for the release of video after a fatal shooting or in custody death, and other state legislatures are revisiting this. So the trend does seem to be towards more timely release of video, or at least giving the discretion to police leadership as to when to release that video, as opposed to having other restrictions even that are mandated by the state.
And that transparency obviously really helps with the trust of the community. So, all right, thank you for that, gentlemen. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I was saying absolutely. I mean, that's the key word here. Is when we first promoted body worn cameras, we talked about the fact that this would be an opportunity to find out what happens. Sometimes the videos would vindicate officers. Other times it would show where they deviate from policy. So what the community members really want to see is disclosure and transparency in all situations. And so transparency is really important. It's really great to hear the comments from two speakers today, where they seem to really have a high set that as a high priority.
Yeah, and one other thing I'll mention, I think that there has been some questions across the country about accountability of officers that are captured doing policy violations on their cameras. So I think that the more accountability pieces we can speak to in our social media outlets or community meetings or direct communications with our community, the more trust and transparency that is going to increase. So I think that pretty much covers that question. Jessica, did any others come in?
Yes, thank you. So we did have another question. Did you involve community members in body-worn camera policy development or revision?
So, Chief, you want to take that one first? So did the community in the actual policy itself or any revisions you've done, were they involved?
Somewhat early on as we were going through that we did a lot of marketing this in the year leading up to implementation. So there was stuff that was passed on through. A lot of the ones, as Strickman was alluding to, is things that were beyond our control, like release of the footage. I mean, that's been governed by the state legislature. But I really do believe, in light of all the recent events nationally, I think you're going to see a concerted effort, at least to use that same language we use in policy, that the law needs to be a living document and be able to be changed. I mean, we don't know what we don't know until we experience it, and I think the past couple of years have certainly taught us that. But yeah, if I had to go back in my mind and think, that was the questions we've had, but we haven't been inundated with requests to view specific video portions. I think I can count on 2 fingers how many times that's happened since we implemented. So the interaction we got, and a lot of that was over social media, folks asking questions, was early on in the process, and to be quite honest, long before we ever even determined which vendor we were going to utilize to deploy.
Excellent. Thanks, Chief. Captain, what about you? Did you involve the community in the actual policy development?
Sure. So, like I said, we had a policy ready to go, and then when we started these meetings with the community stakeholders, we brought copies with them. With us, we handed them out. They questioned a few things. We clarified, the meaning behind it or the purpose behind it. But no, we didn't make any changes. There was no push for change. There was just a couple, clarification conversations. So in a way, yeah, we had it ready to go. We shared it with them. We were open to any questions or concerns or even changes, but we ended up not making any changes based on any of their questions.
Yeah, and I think to the whole policy development and ongoing relationships with the communities, I think a lot of departments across the nation are posting policies on their website so that the community can see, what the policy entails. Obviously, the feedback is going to be taken, on a case-by-case basis. But if there is any feedback, one of you mentioned what we don't know is what we don't know. And the community could bring up a very valid point of that we want to maybe consider in future policy revisions. So we have a question. I'm sorry. Go ahead,
thing real quick, if you don't mind. We actually, of course, hence the 9-minute, 1-second video, we discuss in depth what the policy is through that as you go through, which actually gives them an opportunity to respond and be a citizen.
Jessica, do we want to go to the question from Julia?
Yeah. So there was one person who sent me a message directly, and then let's go to Julia. But how about someone asked, what made both agency representatives choose the brand of body-worn cameras? So let's not get into vendor discussions, but how about also talking about, did you also add any community input or officer input into going with the brand of body-worn cameras?
Captain, right. So not necessarily who you chose, but maybe what was their community input in that?
Sure. So to answer, the quick answer was no, there was no community input in it. We went with the vendor because we use the same vendor for the mobile video solution that we have. And obviously it just coincides with, they just work better, with each other. So that's how we, one of the main reasons we went with the vendor we went with, because we were already customers of them, and a lot of surrounding agencies use them. And, we certainly asked questions to them, and there was all positive feedback, and we are happy with the vendor. But I don't know there's, many differences with the vendors as far as what the community would see, just as far as, apples and oranges, or in this case, a lot of comparisons that we did make just before we made the investment was very similar. So the main reason was just because it worked well with the, it was going to work seamlessly with the current mobile video system we have. It was going to be the same, all the same cloud services, all the server space. It was all going to be seamless with that. So no, but there was no questions from the communities as far as the differences with the vendors. They all had, the main features, and one didn't seem to provide anything overly advantageous than the other.
Okay, thank you for that. So Jessica, I think we'll just move on to Julia's question. So Julia from Knoxville Police Department, do you have any citizen oversight or review committee? If so, how do you share body-worn camera video with them for review? So Chief, do you have a citizen oversight or citizen review committee?
We do not.
Okay, Captain, do you?
We're in the very infantile stages of creating one. And yes, this obviously body-worn cameras came up early on when we talked about the makeup, the purpose, what kind of discussions, what kind of calls for service or incidents would be discussed. And yes, we plan on using body-worn cameras at those meetings.
Okay, great. So thank you for that. I think the next question, Steve, I wouldn't mind if you started with this one. So Sergeant Craig from Beaver Dam Police Department, how do you minimize the narrative of the department is hiding something when it comes to the topic of redaction of body-worn camera video on its release?
You know, that's a challenge. I think once again, it's transparency. If you can explain as best as possible to the public, you know, why it's necessary, you know, to do some redactions, why it's necessary to protect identities at times, and how that can compromise an investigation or potential prosecution or violate somebody's, you know, privacy. And it's best to have those discussions before there's a critical incident and a great deal of public scrutiny, because that's when they're not going to believe much of what you say anyway. But in your ongoing dialogue with community stakeholders and in your presentation of information about your policy, you may want to cover just that point, that in instances where there is video footage of a critical incident, at times we may have to do some redactions and explain why you have to do them, and how those redactions don't really take away from what actually happened, but just sometimes are used to protect people and protect their rights.
Chief, any thoughts on that one? How do you minimize the narrative of that the department might be hiding something?
Not really. I mean, obviously, you don't want to get that label to begin with. That's a hard battle if you have it. But to be honest with you, we have two requests total to view video. We haven't had any critical incident where anybody has served legal process to get the release. So we haven't run across that yet.
Okay, perfect. So I have a question that was sent here. It says, so what is the most effective way when it comes to the community stakeholders? What is the most effective way to communicate with them? And I would have to say, I think it really depends on your community. Personally, I think everybody would agree with me that there's really no substitute for that good old face-to-face communication and one-on-one conversations. So the more we can engage our community in those face-to-face events, those meetings, those presentations, those face-to-face workshops, I think the better off we are. But going back to social media, I think the days are gone where we're going to pick up a newspaper and get our information that way. The way that we, the public get our information, or even law enforcement, is we go to our phone, we go to social media, and depending on what outlet your agency uses, some agencies are very Twitter heavy, some agencies are very Facebook heavy. Obviously, the YouTube channels are very popular in Pitt County. The one about the body worn cameras was the second, most top viewed one. I think it really depends. And I hope you guys agree that, depending on what your community likes to do, if there's quarterly meetings or if there's monthly meetings, and the more your officers can be out in front of those meetings, ready to answer those questions, those hard questions about the body worn cameras, the better off we're going to be as a whole. So, Jessica, are there any other questions that we can address?
So there are two more. One of them is, I like the idea of the body worn camera video of the week from Arlington, Texas. Are there other examples of how body worn camera videos increase opportunities for community engagement with the police?
So, Steve, do you have any other examples? I brought up a couple early on. I like the body worn camera video of the week also from Arlington. Cookeville Police Department engaging their local university. The local media demonstrated the citizens academies. I would imagine that most of you have citizens academies or some subset of citizens academies. Steve, what are some of your thoughts on some other ways that body worn camera videos can be put out on a more widespread scale in the community?
Yeah, some of the departments who have, more sophisticated, larger departments often have more robust communications and public information offices and can employ more robust strategies. They will routinely identify footage, video footage, and they will promote that footage through all the various social media. They'll use YouTube, they'll use Facebook, and it becomes a big part of their branding program. So you can very effectively tease out footage and you can put it together in a way that reinforces the image of your, a positive image of your department. But it does take some investment, and it does take someone who's devoted to going through footage, pulling it together, and getting it out on those social media platforms, to do so. But sometimes you can get, if you really get a good video, you've seen them, the officers dancing in the streets with kids and what have you. You can get up millions of hits sometimes. So it does take someone paying attention and someone who can put that information together and push it out to the various platforms.
Yeah, I think the key is the positive interactions. We don't want to wait for a critical incident to happen in order for us to be releasing video. I think the more proactive and the more in front of it we can be, the better off we are as a police agency. Captain, would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And we always, just like Mr. Rickman said, we always look for those sweet spot moments that were, the officers may or may not have known it happened, but if we do capture them, try to push that out on our social media, just for the community engagements that way. But sometimes those moments just happen, and you have to be told it happened so we can go back and find it and push it out. So absolutely.
Yeah, and you really look for, I think what was most effective is to find those videos that they humanize the officers. That they show a real human side. And I think those are the ones that have the most impact.
Excellent. Thank you. I think we'll just touch on this question real quick. So somebody asked, what is the most innovative, engaging police effort we've seen to integrate community into body-worn camera programs? And, I'll just say from a personal standpoint, I think the most widespread communication we can have is the most engaging. I don't want to, point out a particular example because I think we've showcased a lot of really good examples today, because again, it depends on your community, but the more people you can touch, the better you're going to be. So obviously, if you reach a small community meeting of 5 or 7 people, but you can go to a much larger scale community meeting or multiple community meetings and, demonstrate the technology. I think, we as humans are very hands-on learners, and we'd like to really see how that camera operates. I think integrating any type of demonstration, or like Pitt County did with the scenario-based scenarios on their 9-minute video towards the end. I think that's, a good way for the community to see, okay, I expect the camera is going to capture, everything, when in reality, the camera only captures, a smaller portion of the incident. So again, I guess from my perspective, it would be the most widespread coverage at all if possible. And Jessica just put another great example up of one of our a Facebook video that one of our analysts sent in. So I think that's all I have. Jessica, was there any other questions we could address?
Mary, let me intercede. I give a shout out to once again to the Las Vegas Sheriff's Department. That department was early on users of body-worn cameras. In fact, they participated in one of the breakthrough experiments, which validated their value. But because I live in Las Vegas, I see the impact. I see how they use these videos to help promote their brand. They show up sometimes on mainstream media. They're often on YouTube and Facebook, and then they have the 72-hour policy of releasing videos at the critical incidents, with often the sheriff himself narrating what happened. So I think they have a pretty complete package. So if you want to model yourselves after a department, I would certainly look to Las Vegas.
Thanks, Mary. We don't have any more questions, but we are at the end of the time. So I just want to thank you so much, Mary, Steve, Chief Guard, and Captain DeMedio, for a wonderful presentation. We had a lot of great interaction with the chat, and I just think that everyone was so excited to hear what you all had to say. So we're about to have a 10-minute break and come back at 3 p.m. Eastern for a presentation by Michael Williams from the Office of the Chief Financial Officer at BJA about understanding the federal procurements process.